Christmas Eve was supposed to be about family, about keeping the promise I made to my late wife, that I'd always protect our daughter. But that night, across the table, my son-in-law Jeffrey smirked as he raised his glass and told me I owed him. He demanded I pour my savings into his so-called project, while my daughter sat there silent, caught in his grip. The betrayal burned hotter than the roast ham cooling on my plate. And right then I told myself, he has no idea who he's dealing with, because that was the night I decided to end his little game and make sure he'd never forget it. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I remember the clinking of silverware, the fake laughter, the smell of cinnamon candles trying to cover the stench of arrogance. Jeffrey leaned back in my chair, like he owned the place. His voice carried, every word sharpened with entitlement, while neighbors and friends glanced over their wine glasses, pretending not to notice. He wasn't asking. He was staking a claim in my home, in front of my daughter, as if I were already a relic to be brushed aside. I kept my face calm, the way decades of forensic audits had taught me. But inside, something cracked. A promise to a dead woman echoed like church bells. Don't let anyone hurt Tara. Jeffrey thought he'd corner me with family loyalty. He thought age had softened me. He thought wrong. I excused myself, steady hands hiding the storm, and walked down the hallway to my study. Every photograph on the wall, my wife's smile, Tara as a child, the family we built, watched me as I turned the lock behind me. That's when the ideas started forming. A plan, precise, surgical. I would dismantle him piece by piece, using the very tools he underestimated. Patience, numbers, truth. And as the laughter from the dining room echoed through the door, I whispered to myself, "You just stepped into my ledger, Jeffrey." And I always balanced the books. That was the last peaceful Christmas he'd ever know. I locked the study door behind me and sat at the desk my wife used to laugh about, the one with the brass lamp that always threw a crooked pool of light. I flipped on the lamp, opened a drawer where I kept my old audit notebooks, and felt that old, surgical calm settle over me. Auditing isn't glamour. It's patience, pattern recognition, and the stubborn refusal to accept polite lies. I had done this my whole life. I knew how numbers smelled when they were hiding something. I started small. I pulled up Jeff Ray's LinkedIn thin resume, too many company names, none that matched real tax filings. I ran business lookups, corporate registrations, sunburnt domain names registered with throwaway emails, little red flags, addresses that led to UPS stores, phone numbers that looped to voicemail, and a set of businesses that lived only on brochures and coffee table PowerPoints. I made a spreadsheet, rows and columns, names, EINs, and corporation dates. I cross-referenced every investor testimonial on his site with the Better Business Bureau and a handful of forum posts where people used words like scammed and disappeared. There were complaints, ugly, specific complaints about delayed refunds, ghosted calls, and contracts that never delivered. The more I pulled, the more the veneer peeled. When I called an old colleague from the Small Business Administration, Ed, who still owed me a favor from a bankruptcy case, his voice on the phone was quiet and direct. "Trevor, you sure you want to go down this road?" he asked. I could hear the weight of federal cases in his tone. I've seen guys like him. They don't just take money. They take paperwork, identity, and sometimes they cross into criminal territory. That was the word I didn't want to hear. Criminal. But the thought did what thoughts do in winter. It crystallized. I printed what I had, stacked the pages like evidence, and sat back. The house hummed at night. From the dining room came the faint, hollow echo of Christmas lights still blinking. Then, tucked between a fake invoice and transfer receipt, I found a scanned application, clear, dated, stamped, with Jeffrey's signature and a federal program box checked, PPP. One number stood out, cold as winter, $180,000. I stared at that number, $180,000, until the ink on the page seemed to pulse. A federal loan, meant to keep honest businesses alive during the pandemic, siphoned by Jeffrey's greed. That was no sloppy side hustle. That was a felony. And suddenly, everything around me sharpened. The ticking of the old mantel clock, the faint hum of the fridge down the hall, even the smell of pine from the Christmas tree. My house felt less like a home and more like a courtroom, and Jeffrey had just walked in guilty. I printed the application twice, slipping one copy into a folder labeled in neat block letters, evidence. The other, I tucked beneath a stack of financial journals, bait for the moment I'd need him to expose himself. I wasn't just his father-in-law anymore. I was the quiet prosecutor building a case, and I had the receipts to prove it. The next morning, while the town dug itself out from the snowstorm, I drove across the river to meet Ed at a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and hash browns. He flipped through the documents, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. "Trevor," he muttered, lowering his voice, "if this is the wrong desk, he's looking at years, real time. You ready for that?" I sipped my coffee, bitter and cold, and felt the weight of the question. Was I ready to destroy my daughter's husband? To shatter her marriage, her image of family? My hand tightened on the mug. "What I'm not ready for," I said, "is to let a crook sit at my table and call it love." Ed slid the folder back across the Formica table. "Then you better be smart. Catch him in the act. Make it undeniable." I nodded, already knowing what had to be done. When Jeffrey reached for something that wasn't his, he always did, I'd make sure the trap snapped shut. That night, back in my study, I wheeled the old safe into view and placed the evidence inside. And as the steel door clanged shut, I knew exactly how I'd bait the hook. The trap was set, and the clock started ticking. Jeffrey had no idea what was coming for him. He thought he could waltz into my house, manipulate my daughter, and play me for a fool. But what he didn't know was that I had been trained to see through people's masks. For years, I had watched men like him slip through the cracks, slick, self-assured, thinking they were untouchable. And now, it was my turn to make sure the cracks closed tight. I didn't sleep much those first few nights. I spent hours fine-tuning the cameras, testing the motion sensors, making sure everything was in place. I knew he would try something. It was only a matter of time before his greed overpowered his sense of caution. I had worked too many cases to believe a man like Jeffrey would simply walk away. He was too hungry, too desperate to get his hands on Tara's inheritance. That Friday, after the dinner plates were cleared and the Christmas tree lights flickered in the corner of the room, I sat in the darkened study, watching the feed from my security cameras. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the low hum of the furnace. Tara was upstairs, likely lost in a book or on the phone with her friends, oblivious to what was about to happen. And then, just past midnight, the front door creaked open. I recognized the sound. I didn't need to look at the camera to know who it was. Jeffrey. My heart didn't race. There was no panic, just a sharp, cold clarity of purpose. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. He crept through the hallway, moving like a shadow, his footsteps light but deliberate. I could see the glint of his eyes as they searched for the safe. He had been in this house enough times to know where everything was, to know where my most prized possessions lay hidden. He was so sure of himself, so smug in his belief that he could get away with this. As he reached for the safe, I pushed a button on the remote in my hand. The camera feed switched to a high-definition view, and I saw him freeze for just a split second. He had seen the red light blink on. The trap was active. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a slow breath. This was the moment he would break, the moment when all his lies would unravel. And then, as if on cue, Jeffrey did the one thing that sealed his fate. He reached for the handle of the safe. That was the moment. I watched unseen as he twisted the knob, thinking he could steal his way to victory. But what he didn't know was that the real game had already begun. The safe door opened with that heavy metallic sigh, and Jeffrey's greedy hands dove straight inside. He wasn't cautious, not even a glance over his shoulder. That told me everything. He thought I was asleep upstairs, clueless, blind. But what he pulled out wasn't stacks of cash or heirlooms. It was a dossier. His dossier. Every fake company, every complaint, every forged signature organized, tabbed, and staring back at him in black and white. I saw the smirk falter on his face through the camera feed. He flipped page after page, his lips tightening, eyes darting. He knew this wasn't just paper. It was a noose, braided from his own lies. The motion sensor clicked softly, and the timestamp recording began to autosave directly to the cloud. Insurance. I had built in redundancy. There would be no destroying the evidence. And then came the real blade, an envelope taped to the bottom of the safe, marked in bold red ink, in case of tampering. He froze, pulled it open, and there it was, a letter addressed to the U.S. Attorney's Office, complete with a USB drive ready to mail itself the moment he triggered the fail-safe timer. Jeffrey's face turned pale. He cursed under his breath, stuffing the papers back, fumbling to shut the safe as if that would erase what he had seen. But it was too late. The trap wasn't just physical, it was psychological. He was caught, whether he realized it yet or not. I stepped silently into the hallway, every creak of the old floorboards masked by his frantic movements. My hand brushed the wall where my wife's photo hung, her smile frozen in time. "This is for you," I thought, and when I finally spoke in the shadows of the doorway, my voice cut through the silence like a verdict. "Enjoying the reading material, Jeffrey?" He dropped the folder. The sound echoed through the room like a gavel striking wood. He spun around, his face drained of color, like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. But this was no cookie. His jaw clenched, eyes darting between me and the folder on the floor. For the first time since I'd known him, Jeffrey didn't have a ready smile or slick excuse. Just raw, naked panic. "Trevor? This is what it looks like," he stammered, his hands trembling as he shoved the folder shut with his shoe. I stepped closer, slow and deliberate, letting the floor creak beneath my weight. "Funny. To me, it looks exactly like what it is." I tapped the safe door with one finger. "Fraud. Theft. A federal crime, neatly gift-wrapped in your own handwriting." He tried to laugh it off, that fake salesman chuckle he used at the dinner table, but it cracked halfway out. "You don't understand, this is business positioning. Everyone does it. No one gets hurt." I leaned in, close enough to smell the whiskey still on his breath. My wife's grave would disagree. Tara's future would disagree. And so, will the U.S. Attorney when they open that envelope you just triggered? His eyes widened. "Envelope? What envelope?" He spun back to the safe, ripping the taped letter open, scanning the first lines. His lips moved as he read. "If you're reading this, Jeffrey, the timer has started. The evidence is already on its way." He looked at me, sweat beading on his forehead. "You wouldn't. You can't." I folded my arms, steady, unshaken. "Try me." For a long beat, he stood there in silence, chest heaving, a trapped animal calculating exits. Then his expression shifted, darkened. The mask slid back on. "Tara will never believe you. She's my wife, my family. She trusts me." The words cut, but I didn't flinch. "Not after tonight," I said, and that was when I heard it, the creak of the upstairs floorboards. Tara was awake. She was coming down. Jeffrey's face twisted as footsteps approached the study door. He whispered, frantic, "Don't you dare bring her into this." But the doorknob turned. The door opened, and there she was, my daughter, framed in the hall light, her hair mussed from sleep, her eyes narrowing as they adjusted. Tara looked between us, the safe, the papers scattered like fallen leaves. Confusion clouded her face, but underneath it, I saw the flicker of fear. She knew something was very wrong. "Dad." Her voice cracked, small, uncertain. "What's going on?" Before I could answer, Jeffrey lunged toward her with that syrupy tone he reserved for damage control. "Sweetheart, it's nothing. Your dad confused. He's dredging up nonsense, making me look bad." He forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow, brittle. I raised a hand, stopping in mid-lie. "Tara, look." I bent, picked up the folder, and held it out to her. "This isn't nonsense. It's every company he's ever fabricated, every investor he's conned. And here," I pulled the PPP application free, laid it flat on the desk under the lamplight. "This is federal fraud. $180,000 stolen in your husband's name." Her breath caught. She stepped forward, eyes scanning the document. I saw her lips press into a thin line, the same way her mother's had when she discovered the truth in a set of crooked books years ago. Jeffrey's mask cracked. His hand shot out, trying to snatch the paper from her grip. "It's not what you think, Tara. It was temporary, a business necessity." Don't, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut. The word hung heavy in the air, final. I hadn't heard her speak to him like that before. Jeffrey froze, his face shifting from panic to fury, and then to something worse, calculation. He looked at me, eyes narrowing, then back at her, forcing a smirk. You really believe him? The old man who can't let go of control. But Tara didn't look at him. She looked at me, her eyes brimming, not with doubt, but with the ache of realization. She whispered, almost to herself, Mom warned me. She told me. And that's when Jeffrey slammed his fist down on the desk, rattling the lamp, his voice rising into a roar that shook the walls. She's mine, Trevor, and I'm not letting you take her from me. The sound of his fist hitting the desk echoed through the study like a gunshot, rattling the lamp and sending a cascade of paper clips onto the floor. Tara flinched but didn't back away. I stayed still, letting the silence do its work, the way I had in countless depositions, calm while the guilty exposed themselves. Stepped back from her. I said quietly, my voice low but cutting, right now. Jeffrey's chest heaved. He looked at me, then at Tara, trying to decide which version of himself to wear, the charming con man or the cornered predator. His eyes flicked toward the door as if measuring his chances. You've poisoned her against me, he hissed. You're turning my wife into your spy. Tara's voice was steady now, a tremor of steel under it. No, Jeff, you did that yourself. She raised the papers slightly, her hands no longer shaking. You lied to me. You lied about everything. His smirk returned, but this time it was jagged, desperate. You think this will hold up? One angry old man's printouts? I'll spin this, Tara. You'll see. I took a step forward, closing the distance. There's nothing to spin. Every file is mirrored online, time-stamped, backed up in places you can't touch. And the prosecutors will be very interested in your PPP application. He laughed, a harsh bark of sound. You're bluffing. I met his gaze, steady as a ledger. Try me? Tara looked at him then, not with love, but with the cold clarity of someone watching a mask fall. She shook her head slowly. Get out, Jeff. His eyes flashed, anger sparking, but he didn't move. Instead, he leaned toward her, voice low, venomous. You walk away from me now, and you'll regret it. You'll lose everything. I stepped between them, feeling the weight of my years, but also the strength of them. No, I said, she's about to gain everything she almost lost. And then from somewhere deep inside, Jeffrey's voice rose, raw and cracked. If you think you've won, Trevor, you haven't seen what I can do. He turned on his heel and stormed out, the front door slamming, so hard the Christmas ornaments trembled. I exhaled slowly, but even as the quiet returned, I knew this wasn't over. He'd be back, and next time he wouldn't come alone. The silence after that slammed door was heavier than any storm. Tara stood in the middle of the study, paper still in her hand, her knuckles white against the edge of the evidence. I could see the war behind her eyes, grief, betrayal, disbelief, all colliding at once. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally whispered, Dad, how long have you known? I sighed, lowering myself into the chair, the leather creaking under my weight. Long enough to be certain. Not long enough to protect you from the hurt. My words hung between us, thick with regret. I promised your mother I'd keep you safe. Tonight was the only way. Her eyes welled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she dropped into the opposite chair, staring at the documents like they might rearrange themselves into a better truth. I kept making excuses for him, she admitted. Every red flag, every missing detail. I told myself I was just being paranoid. I wanted to believe he loved me. I leaned forward, resting a hand over hers. That's how men like Jeffrey survive. They feed on trust. But trust without proof is just hope dressed up in Sunday clothes. And hope isn't enough to stop a thief. The house groaned as the wind pushed against the siding. Somewhere upstairs, a loose shutter banged. It was a reminder. Walls only hold if the foundation is strong. Tonight, our foundation had cracked. But maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild. Tara wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. Steadier now. So what happens next? I looked toward the safe, toward the blinking red light of the hidden camera still recording. Next, I said slowly, we make sure he can't spin this into another lie. We put him in a corner so tight, the only way out is through the truth. She nodded, her jaw setting with quiet resolve. For the first time that night, I saw my wife's strength reflected in her. But just as I allowed myself that sliver of hope, headlights cut across the window. An engine idled outside, too loud, too long. Jeffrey hadn't gone far, and judging by the second set of shadows stepping onto the porch, he hadn't come back alone. The rumble of that engine bled into the walls, low and menacing, until it felt like the whole house was holding its breath. Tara froze, eyes flicking to me. I raised a hand, quiet, steady, and motioned her toward the stairs. She shook her head, but I pressed again, firmer this time. Upstairs, I whispered, now. The front porch groaned under heavy steps. More than one set. My cameras confirmed it. Jeffrey wasn't alone. 2 men in leather jackets lingered at his side, their faces half hidden beneath baseball caps. Not professionals, too sloppy, but muscle all the same. He was escalating, trading charm for intimidation. The doorbell rang once, long and sharp. Then came the pounding. Open up, Trevor. Jeffrey's voice was no longer slick or polished. It was jagged, raw. You want to play games? Let's play. I stayed seated at my desk, the monitor feeds glowing in front of me. The cameras caught everything. Angles from the porch, the hallway, even the side yard where one of his friends lit a cigarette and spat into the snow. Evidence was piling up with every second. The pounding grew louder. Tara's shadow hovered at the top of the stairs. I met her eyes and mouthed, phone. She understood, retreating into the dark, her footsteps light against the old wood. I stood, adjusted the lamp so the safe glinted just enough, and opened the study door. The pounding stopped. The silence was worse. Then, with a sudden crash, the front door burst inward, splintering against the wall. Jeffrey strode in first, his grin wide but twitching at the corners. "Where's the file, old man?" he barked, his voice filling the house. The two behind him spread out, trying to look tough, but I caught the unease in their eyes. They hadn't signed up for a federal crime scene. I didn't flinch. I stepped into the hallway, arms folded, calm as a judge. "Careful, Jeffrey," I said, my voice steady. "You just added breaking and entering to your rap sheet." The taller of his friends muttered something under his breath. Shifting uncomfortably, Jeffrey shot him a glare, then turned back to me. "You think you're clever? You think some paperwork scares me? You're going to hand it over. Right now." I let a small smile curl at the edge of my lips. Funny thing about paperwork, it multiplies. Burn one copy, 3 more rise up, and all of them are already out of your reach. His grin faltered. "Liar." From the stairs above, Tara's voice cut through the tension, stronger than I'd ever heard it. "He's not lying, Jeff." I saw it myself. The room froze. Even his hired muscle turned toward her voice. And in that moment, Jeffrey realized his mask had shattered for good. Jeffrey's head snapped upward, his eyes narrowing as Tara stepped slowly down the staircase, each creak of the wood a hammer driving nails into his coffin. She wasn't trembling anymore. Her shoulders were squared. Her gaze locked on him with something colder than anger, clarity. "You brought strangers in my father's house?" she asked, her voice low but sharp enough to cut. "On Christmas week?" For a flicker of a moment, Jeffrey's smooth facade cracked again. He turned on his men, snarling, "Stay put." Then back at her, his tone softening into that practiced silk. "Tara, sweetheart, you don't understand. He's manipulating you. He's always wanted control, even after your mother passed. This is just his way of keeping you under his thumb." She reached the bottom step, the PPP application still in her hand. She held it up, the paper trembling only from the draft sweeping in through the broken door. "Explain this, then. Explain why you signed your name on federal fraud." One of the thugs muttered, "Fraud?" and shifted on his heels. The other rubbed his jaw, eyes darting between Jeffrey and the open doorway. They weren't here for prison time. They were here for easy intimidation. Now, they were realizing they'd walked into something much darker. Jeffrey's voice rose, frantic. That's nothing. A business tactic. Everyone. Stop. Tara cut him off, her tone like a whip crack. I've listened to you spin lies long enough. Not tonight. He lunged toward her, fury overtaking finesse. Instinct kicked in. I stepped forward, planted myself between them. For a second, it felt like I was 40 years younger, standing tall, refusing to yield. Touch her, I said evenly, and you'll wish the only thing you lost tonight was money. Jeffrey stopped short, chest heaving, rage painted across his face. The men behind him shuffled nervously, the weight of the law dawning on them with every second. And then, before anyone could move, blue and red lights flared across the broken doorway, washing the hallway in a harsh glow. Tara's whispered words cut through the air. I called them. Jeffrey's expression collapsed into shock as the sound of boots crunched on the icy porch. The cavalry had arrived. The flashing lights painted Jeffrey's face in strokes of red and blue, like a man already behind bars. His hired muscle froze, their tough guy posturing evaporating on the sound of radios crackling and the unmistakable click of a shotgun being chambered outside. Police, step out with your hands where we can see them. For a heartbeat, the whole room held still. Jeffrey's jaw clenched, his eyes darting between me, Tara, and the folder still in her grip. Then he tried to pivot, throw his hands up and barking at his friends. We're leaving. It's just a misunderstanding. But I knew the look in his eyes. He was about to spin, to play victim, to paint me as the aggressor. I had watched con men pivot their stories mid-sentence 1,000 times in court. The trick was always the same. Talk fast enough and hope the truth can't catch up. Tara stepped forward before he could open his mouth. Her voice was steady, loud enough for the officers outside to hear. He broke in. He threatened us. And he's been stealing hundreds of thousands through fake companies. She held up the PPP document, the paper trembling but undeniable. This is federal evidence. The two thugs exchanged a look, then raised their hand higher. One even stammered, "We didn't know, man. We didn't sign up for this." They backed toward the door, eager to melt into the night, rather than be caught in Jeffrey's web. Jeffrey sneered at them, fury bubbling. Cowards. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. This is strike 2, Jeffrey. First, you humiliated yourself at my table. Now you're standing in front of cops, exposed by your own wife. Next time, you won't walk away. His lips curled, but he didn't answer. The officers pushed inside, weapons lowered but ready. One of them scanned the scene, the broken door, the folder of evidence, Tara's pale face, and gave me a nod that said everything. They saw enough. "Sir, you'll need to come with us," one officer told Jeffrey. Jeffrey raised his hands, that smirk snapping back onto his face like a mask. "Of course, officer. I'm the victim here. This old man set me up." But as they cuffed him and led him out into the snow, his eyes met mine, cold, burning, promising that this fight wasn't over. And I knew he meant it, because men like Jeffrey don't surrender. They scheme, and his next move was already brewing. The house felt hollow after they hauled Jeffrey away, the broken door groaning against the winter wind. Tara sat on the couch, knees pulled close, staring at the folder of evidence like it was radioactive. I brewed coffee, black, no sugar, and set it down beside her. She didn't drink, just whispered, "He'll come back." You saw his eyes. I nodded. Yes, which is why we don't wait for him to make the next move. We stay ahead. The next days blurred into strategy. I fortified the house, but more importantly, I fortified the paper trail. Every document, every recording from the cameras, every transcript of his threats. I organized them into a neat, airtight package. Old habits die hard. I made copies on encrypted drives, mailed sealed envelopes to Ed, even stashed one with a retired judge I trusted from my audit days. Jeffrey could bluff, but he couldn't erase the truth now. Tara tried to sleep, but nightmares stalked her. One night she confessed, voice breaking, "I feel like a fool, Dad. Everyone warned me." I didn't want to see it. I took her hand, firm. Trusting isn't foolish. What's foolish is ignoring the evidence once it shows itself. And tonight you didn't. Her eyes softened, but the hurt lingered. 3 days later, as snow piled against the porch, the call came. Jeffrey was out on bail, not even a week, and he was already free to circle like a vulture. Tara's face went pale as she overheard the voicemail from the officer. Stay cautious. He's unpredictable. That evening, I found a note slid under the broken door, written in Jeffrey's jagged scrawl. You think you won? This isn't over. She'll choose me. Tara crumpled it in her fist, shaking. I took it from her gently, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and labeled it with a date. Another piece of evidence. Another nail in his coffin. But even as I reassured her, I knew he'd escalate. He had nothing left but desperation. And desperate men are the most dangerous. It was a week later when Jeffrey made his next move, and he chose the one stage he thought I couldn't control, public humiliation. The town's annual winter charity gala, held in the old courthouse, a place dripping with marble and chandeliers. Everyone who mattered in our small circle would be there. Business owners, judges, pastors, even the mayor. He knew Tara and I always attended, and he wanted a stage. I spotted him the moment we walked in. Slick suit, hair combed back, that salesman's grin plastered across his face like nothing had ever happened. Whispers followed him, the air humming with gossip about his arrest. But Jeffrey thrived on twisting narratives. He marched straight toward us, wine glass in hand, loud enough for the whole hall to hear. Well, if it isn't the great protector himself, he boomed, eyes locking on me. Tell me, Trevor, how's retirement treating you? Still digging through papers like a paranoid old man. Laughter rippled through a few onlookers. I didn't rise. Instead, I let him have a stage. Tara stiffened, but I placed a steady hand on her arm. Let him talk. I whispered. Jeffrey raised his glass higher. This man wants you all to believe I'm a criminal, a fraud. But he's just bitter, afraid his daughter married a man with vision, with ambition. He turned, theatrically gesturing to crowd. What do you see? A villain? Or a family man under attack? The hush was palpable. Eyes flicked to me. Waiting, I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a small flash drive, and held it up so it caught the chandelier light. Funny thing, Jeffrey. Vision doesn't usually come with a federal loan number attached. The projector screen behind the podium flickered on. With a click of the remote in my hand, images filled the hall. Scanned invoices, shell company registrations, and finally, the PPP loan application, his signature bold and undeniable. Gasps echoed across the marble. Jeffrey's smirk collapsed as the crowd erupted in murmurs. His cheeks flushed crimson, his grip tightening on the wine glass until it cracked in his hand. And for the second time, in front of everyone who once admired him, Jeffrey was stripped bare. But humiliation is gasoline to a man like him. And I knew the fire he'd light next would be his most dangerous yet. The fallout from the gala spread faster than wildfire. By the next morning, Jeffrey's name was poison in town. Former friends stopped taking his calls. Business owners pulled away. Even his hired muscle from that night wanted nothing to do with him once they realized they might be dragged into federal charges. His kingdom of lies was crumbling, and he knew it. That's when he went nuclear. 2 nights later, Tara found him waiting in the driveway, his car idling like a predator in the snow. She froze, fear tightening her chest, until I stepped out behind her. Jeffrey leaned against the hood, pale, sleepless, his once polished face unraveling into raw desperation. You think you've won, old man? His voice cracked, half snarl, half plea. You've turned her against me, dragged my name through the mud, and for what? So you can sit there in your dusty study pretending you're still relevant? I kept my stance calm, measured. No, Jeffrey. I did it so she could see you for what you really are, so she'd have a choice. His eyes darted at Tara, glassy with rage. A choice? She's my wife. Mine. You think paperwork and parlor tricks can erase that? Tara stepped forward, her voice firm, louder than the crunch of snow beneath her boots. I'm not your possession, and I will not be dragged down by you any longer. That hit him harder than any evidence ever could. His hands shook, his jaw trembled, and for a moment, He looked like a boy denied candy. Then his expression hardened into something venomous. "You'll regret this. Both of you. If you don't sign those divorce papers, I'll burn everything down. I'll take you both with me." I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a sealed envelope, and tossed it onto the hood of his car. He flinched as it slid toward him. Inside is every document, every recording, every confession of your fraud. Sign the divorce papers and disappear, and it never has to see daylight. Refuse, and by morning the U.S. Attorney's Office will have it in their inbox. He stared at it, breathing hard, torn between bluster and survival. And then his laugh broke the night, ragged, bitter. "You think you're judge and jury? No, Trevor, you're executioner." His hand hovered over the envelope, and in that suspended second, everything. The lies, the betrayal, the promise I made to my wife, balanced on his choice. Jeffrey's hand trembled over the envelope, the snowflakes melting on its surface like seconds slipping away. For the first time, he seemed to understand the walls closing in, no charm, no threats, no accomplices left to save him. Just him, his signature, and the truth. He tore the envelope open with shaking fingers. Out slid the papers, a sworn confession, the divorce settlement, and instructions for relinquishing any claim to Tara's inheritance. His eyes darted across the words, his face draining of color as if the ink itself were poison. "You can't make me sign this," he hissed. But his voice lacked its old fire. I stepped closer, meeting his gaze with the weight of every year I carried. "I'm not making you, Jeffrey. You're choosing. Prison or pen. Either way, justice comes tonight." Tara stood beside me, shoulders squared, her mother's resolve etched in every line of her face. She didn't flinch when he turned toward her, searching for pity, for weakness. There was none left, only silence, heavier than judgment. His hand shook as he picked up the pen. The scrape of it across the page was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. He signed once, then again, until each document bore the mark of his surrender. When he dropped the pen, it clattered like a gavel striking wood. The smirk was gone. The mask was gone. All that remained was a hollow man, stripped of power, standing in the snow with his empire of lies collapsing around him. I gathered the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and locked in my coat. "It's over," I said. "You walk away tonight, and you never come back." Jeffrey's eyes burned, but his shoulders sagged. He turned, stumbling toward his car, muttering curses swallowed by the wind. The headlights cut one final slash across the house before vanishing into night. Tara let out a breath that sounded like release. I placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, unshaken. "Your mother was right," I whispered. "The greatest inheritance isn't money. It's knowing how to protect yourself from wolves." Inside, the safe stood open, empty but no longer a trap. It was a symbol now, not of what could be stolen, but of what had been preserved. Truth, dignity, and a daughter's freedom. And as the snow fell quiet around us, I knew the ledger was finally balanced. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.